The absence. It was a cool, quiet afternoon at the university. The lecture hall was filled with the low hum of students settling in as Professor Hamilton, a well-known atheist and brilliant mind, entered the room. He stood at the front, eyes sharp behind his glasses, and spoke with his usual confidence. "Today, let me challenge your beliefs." He turned to the class and asked, "Tell me, did God create everything that exists?" A student in the front row, unsure but respectful, replied, "Yes, Professor. God created everything." The professor smirked, walking slowly across the front. "So then, God created evil?" He paused. "If God created everything and evil exists, then God created evil. And if God created evil, then in one word, God is wicked." The class grew silent. The young believer who answered earlier lowered his head, unable to respond. The professor chuckled quietly. "Isn't that what logic tells us?" Suddenly, from the back of the room, a hand rose. It was a quiet student, one who rarely spoke. The room turned toward him, curious. "Yes?" the professor asked, somewhat amused. "May I ask a question, sir?" The student stood up. "Does cold exist?" The professor raised an eyebrow. "Of course it does. Haven't you ever felt it?" The student shook his head gently. "Actually, sir, cold does not exist. According to the laws of physics, what we call cold is merely the absence of heat. Absolute zero is the point where all molecular motion stops. There's no heat at all. But cold itself doesn't have its own existence. It's just what we experience when heat is not there." The professor narrowed his eyes but said nothing. The student continued, "May I ask another question? Does darkness exist?" "Of course," the professor snapped. "What kind of question is that?" The student replied calmly, "Actually, sir, darkness also does not exist. Darkness is only the absence of light. We can study light, we can break it into wavelengths, measure its speed, but we cannot measure darkness. It's a word we use to describe what happens when there is no light present." Now a hush fell over the room. The professor stood still. "And so," the student said gently, "is it not possible that evil is not a substance, not something created, but rather the absence of God? Just as darkness is the absence of light and cold is the absence of heat, evil exists where God's love, justice, and goodness are not invited. It is not that God created evil, but that when mankind chose to reject God, we created a space where His presence is absent." The professor opened his mouth, but no words came. The student's voice trembled slightly now, but it was filled with conviction. "You ask why there's so much evil in the world, but maybe the better question is, why have we pushed God so far out of our schools, our homes, our hearts?" The entire class was silent. That day, minds were stirred, not by force but by truth. A few began to think deeper. Some, for the first time, wondered if faith had a place in logic, and though the professor never admitted it, a seed was planted even in him. Moral lesson. Evil is not proof of God's absence. It is a cry for His presence. Just as darkness flees from light and cold vanishes with heat, evil is overcome when we allow God's love to enter our hearts and world. Advice for believers. When challenged, do not fear. Faith is not blind. It walks hand in hand with truth. Let your light shine even in the most skeptical rooms, and never underestimate the power of asking the right question.